You had kindly opened tonight's lecture by setting the stage of European security. I wondered what you would be able to say in terms of what the greatest threat to NATO security is today.
Well, probably the most significant issue that's confronting us, in addition to the conventional threats that you have on the flank, is the fragmented consensus when it comes to acting jointly in a crisis. We've made some considerable improvements in that regard, but because Europe itself is now in flux, it's divided on different issues. Transatlantic relations are also strained in some areas. Being able to build consensus on acting together, whether it's 2% of GDP on defense or how you act in a crisis, I would argue it's these soft elements rather than hard power that are really a problem. Europe and the United States don't have a problem when it comes to hard power potential. We are the wealthiest alliance that's out there. So if we wanted to actualize that, it would not be an issue. It's the politics of it all, I would argue, that present the biggest problem.
Building upon that, what you've just mentioned in terms of regional destabilization, you spoke a bit during tonight's lecture about how important it is to work with the institutions that are already in place. Taking that into account, where do you think the EU and NATO can work together and to be most efficient?
I think the biggest issue that we have right now is how the European Union and NATO can cooperate addressing hybrid threats, unconventional threats, sharing information, sharing intelligence. We're doing a lot of that, and a lot of progress has been made. But we are ultimately different in normative terms. Ultimately, NATO is as strong as the European-American relationship is. The EU is only as strong as relationships between individual states. So working on these relationships, I would argue, is critical. And only from there, when you have consensus, you can build specific programs going forward.
You had spoken a bit about how NATO membership is a way to combat the destabilization effects of Russia's involvement in the Balkans specifically. How do you propose balancing NATO enlargement with the perception of that enlargement being as a threat from the Russian perspective?
Well, the Russians have argued essentially from the very beginning of the process in the 1990s in terms that are strictly geopolitical. They're kind of balance of power spheres of influence argument. NATO enlargement has always been a bottom-up process as we saw it. Remember, in addition to Article 5, you've got Article 2, Article 10. It's about values. It's about autonomous decisions undertaken by consensus by democratic states. I believe NATO enlargement brought more stability to Europe. Especially in hindsight, it seems like it was a foregone conclusion. It wasn't. If we had ended up with a gray zone that was unstable, that was disorganized, I think the security situation would have been much more difficult. We need to restart, in my view. We need to restart that process. We, to some extent, forgot how important NATO enlargement, because of its norm setting, preconditions that we put in place. You had to be a democracy, you had to be a market economy, you had to be a net contributor to collective security and collective defense, and you couldn't have any sort of ethnic or border issues. That brought a very important accelerator of systemic transformation across post-communist states. So I'm a great proponent of offering countries that are now pressured a path to NATO membership, a path to EU membership. I would really reinvest from the European Union side in the Eastern Partnership, for example, to encourage these states to come closer to the European Union. If you don't offer some sort of longer-term perspective of joining the system of democratic states, it's much harder for people to opt out or resist pressure from the outside.